The most important point, I think, is maintaining a really good balance. And even your device, TickTalk, has a focus mode where you're going to set some boundaries, just like you would any other activity for a child. Why would their online habits not have some form of boundaries?
Welcome back to TickTalk University, where we talk about kids, technology, and navigating the digital world. I'm your host, Kaylani, and today I'm excited to be joined by Anna Memmo. Anna is a compliance and IT professional with over 20 years of experience, specializing in COPPA, FERPA, and children's online privacy. She's worked with organizations like IBM, HP, and Deloitte, and now she helps startups and child-focused technology companies build safer, privacy-first digital experiences for kids. For parents who may have heard of COPPA but aren't exactly sure what it means, how would you explain COPPA in simple terms, and why is it so important when it comes to technology our kids are using today?
Sure, it's a very important question, and I know that it's on parents' minds, especially in the technology world today that we live in and the ever expanding uh, functions and features and technology devices that kids are using today. So, really, COPPA is all about putting parents in control of the data that is being collected from their child, whether they're working on a web app or they've got their mobile phones out and they're downloading mobile apps on the various technology platforms. Parents should know today what website or online operators are collecting from their children, and they have certain rights over their data and what they're collecting.
And when exactly was COPPA created?
Oh, well, believe it or not, I can actually state that it has been over a quarter of a century, if that makes sense. So in the late 90s, during the dot-com era, they created, Congress enacted COPPA in 1998, and then the FTC is responsible. They issue updates, and we've just had one recently that we can talk about, and they enforce the children's online privacy rule, and it became in fact effective in 2000. So it's been around for quite a while, and we can go through and talk about maybe how it really did. The enforcement actions transpired over a quarter of a century, and what some of the focus topics were as technology developed, because it really is a dynamic environment, isn't it?
It is. I'd love to hear more about how it's changed from simply computers to social media, and then there's games as well.
Right. So we actually at iKeepSafe we have quite a few clients that are not just focused on web apps or the traditional mobile phone apps that you see children spanning, and some of the online social media apps, but they've really expanded into any other type of connected devices, such as toys, children's toys. We have a few clients that do watches, right? Like TikTok that children are wearing for various purposes. There are robots that are coming out that some are more educational, meaning some children want to learn how to code, right? And this provides them an apparatus to be able to code online and then use a device that's connected to the internet that's collecting data potentially from them. So there's really a large different gamut of devices, including another one would be those uh, virtual headsets that you see that are being used more commonly. And of course, they're being used in different spaces such as medical devices, or the medical field and educational, military as well. But children are using them as well to help learn and educate them on certain behavioral patterns, you might say.
I don't have kids myself, so I try to put myself in like a parent's shoes. And I didn't even know there was like medical technology where there are, like technology that has to be COPPA approved or preferred because there's always a risk when there is technology involved.
Sure. Well, there is really a very broad spectrum of how, especially as I mentioned, the headsets, the virtual and augmented reality headsets are being used. But if the child is under the age of 13 and they're using that device, then COPPA would apply. Now, they may be using it more for educational purposes, and we do have some that are using it more for specialized needs children, right, that are trying to learn how to function in a real world. And so there might be a scenario where they walk them through a checkout counter at an airport, right, a security gate at an airport, and they have different videos that are reflected there. But they could be potentially collecting data from children. So they have to have proper disclosures. And what we do at iKeepSafe is we review those disclosures and the privacy policies to determine if they are COPPA compliant and what data they may be collecting from children and using and disclosing. That is the language and the COPPA regulation is what data are we collecting, how are we using it, for what purpose, and then of course, is it being disclosed? And if it's being disclosed, who are we disclosing it to, right? Parents would want to know if their
Right.
children's data is being disclosed.
Of course, especially if they would prefer if their child's information or even their face isn't shared publicly because they want to protect their kids from a lot of people out there.
Yes, and so if you look at, and we can talk about the evolution of children's technology since the bill was introduced and enacted in 1998, I can kind of go through just a few things so that you can really see the full spectrum. And in terms of what are those privacy challenges, right, that families are dealing with today. So if you like, we can go through some of the history of what has taken place since the very early era of COPPA, you might say, through the current, right, the current situation that we're dealing with in technology. It's really interesting to see the evolution. And then I think it really is a good indication to see how these cases have evolved and what violations have really taken place. And I think it would help parents to know what these violations are in order for them when they're evaluating a product for their child, is it really safe and is it really COPPA compliant? They might have a better understanding, right, if they were to understand the overall evolution. So I would be happy to go through that with you.
I'd love to go through the history, and I think the parents would really appreciate that as well.
Okay. So in 1999, when the dot-com era, which is really my era of my business background, I was in the throes of that business development and technology integration, and when the dot-com companies were really taking off. And so the very first privacy violation was a virtual community, an online virtual community. And that was in 1999. And they basically misrepresented what purpose they were collecting the data for. So, just to give you an example, they might have been collecting data and stating that it was going to be used for internal purposes, right? But then perhaps later it was uncovered that the data was not being used just for internal purposes or for the virtual community, right? In other words, they might have been using the data to advertise to third parties, or maybe they were selling it to third parties. those are some of the things that when iKeepSafe performs their certification programs that we look at. How is the data really being used, and how are we defining it? And are we really meeting that disclosure and that criteria? Is that really how the data is being used? And if we're collecting data from children, are we necessarily collecting only the data that we need? Or are we going beyond the scope of the data that we need? And then you might want to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why do we need the additional data that may not be required to operate that particular virtual community, right? Or another website operator might be collecting data, and maybe they're following some of the other rules for children under the age of 13, but perhaps they're doing it without consent. So in the early 2000s, we started to see a lot of providers, online providers, not collecting consent, not maybe perhaps not even collecting the proper level of consent, meaning that the COPPA rule of the FTC have provided guidelines in terms of delineation of what is an adequate level of consent, and what types and what methods are appropriate, right? A lot of times I'll talk to parents, and they really don't have a lot of knowledge about what type of consent would be applicable for COPPA. So a lot of the cases that we saw in the early 2000 era were really about no parental consent, and then they also failed to post a clear and complete privacy notice, right? That has to be an absolute. So anytime a parent is looking at a product like TickTalk, right, you go to your website or your mobile app, and as you're downloading the TickTalk mobile app, you do see a clear and distinguishable privacy policy, right, that is posted on your website, posted on your mobile application. And so that is really a point in time when a parent should read the notice and understand the notice. As we went through the mid 2000 era, more around 2006 and 2008, of course, we had a lot of social networking website operators that were collecting, using, and disclosing PII of children. And some of these operators were in violation of not, again, collecting verifiable parental consent for the use of the product. And they, of course, continued to do so for a while. They were also perhaps advertising as free, but yet failing to collect verifiable parental consent and failing to provide notice to the parent of what data they're collecting and what is the particular site's information use and disclosure practices. So again, we were seeing more violations, but as the web was developing into social networking website operators, there were online virtual worlds. The first case, if we talk about mobile apps that are being downloaded by children on their mobile phone, that occurred in the 2011 timeframe. And again, just because it was a downloadable app and it was collecting data from children under the age of 13, they were not collecting any form of parental consent and providing notice. And that really is a very key focus of COPPA. So that kind of spans the early 2011 timeframe, and then it proceeded, and then there was some other action of a general audience website that were attracting children, but it may not necessarily been their primary audience. And they were in violation of a data breach and had also not collected verifiable parental consent. They were actually a publisher and developer of applications that children were using, right, on social media sites, and a data breach did occur. And there have been several cases as you go through the timeline that do call out data security, which is another very important element of COPPA, because COPPA does want the operator to provide some method of what they refer to as reasonable data security measures. So we've, believe it or not, we have seen quite a few of those through the 2000, I see a few here through 2015. Then we went into more about the ad networks and what I refer to as the third party networks, where your child might be using a particular app, and unknown to the parent, even unknown to the child, they may actually be using something we refer to as persistent identifiers. So even you yourself, when you're using a web app, they can identify you through various mechanisms such as a browser ID or a device ID or maybe an ad ID. And there are quite a few cases where we had some defendants that were failing to inform those ad network providers that their service was directed to children. So it really started to, I would say there was a increase in scope in terms of who was really responsible for COPPA. It's not just the online provider where the child might be signing up for the service and the provider's getting consent from the parent and they're serving notice. We also have to consider what is happening to the children's data as it's being used. Are there persistent identifiers that are being used, which is really referred to more as, I want to call it passive tracking, right, of children, where you're not actively collecting the data directly from a child, but we refer to it as passive data collection. And maybe perhaps parents aren't aware of that could potentially be happening, and that you want to read. That's another good reason you want to read the policy, because COPPA is requiring that we disclose, the online providers disclose if they are using these persistent identifiers, and they really want to know how they're using them. And parents should ask, how are they being used? Are they being used to target what we refer to as behavioral advertising, right? And so that occurred throughout 2010 up through 2015. It continues to happen in a lot of the applications that we review at iKeepSafe. And we review many policies that state that there is no location tracking. I know that TickTalk follows that policy, right? That there's no you may be tracking a child with a watch, which is one of the benefits of the TickTalk device, that you know at a certain point in time where the child might be located. But there's no location tracking for purposes of geo-targeting the advertising. And so, yes, we have cases that have been filed by the FTC related to that. And then as we get into 2018, we have uh, some connected toy violations where they were collecting data from children and didn't provide sufficient notice, right? And and we're not collecting verifiable consent. And they, who knows what data they're collecting, right? With some of the connected toys, they might be collecting voice recordings. The child might be speaking to the device, learning from the device, being educated from the device. But I guess the question in some of the cases or some of the areas that we reviewed is how long are you really keeping the data, and what is the data being used for, and what are the data retention practices. Um, so under the COPPA regulations, you really should not be keeping it for an indefinite period of time. And I believe at least one of the cases was based on that as it related to a connected device. And then we have, just to kind of finalize that area and summarize that, video game playing providers. This one was 2025. Here again, we're collecting data from children under the age of 13. We're sharing with third party analytic companies and advertisers those user IDs or persistent identifiers that I just referenced. And they're tracking them, and they're using them for other commercial purposes without parent knowledge or without consent. So that kind of keeps us up to date in the 2025 time frame of and you can see some of the progression of as technology has evolved, what has taken place uh, in terms of enforcement.
And I can only imagine how much more it will evolve, especially with AI technology. It's so new right now, but it's in everything. And a lot of kids, especially under the age of 13 or even the COVID kids, they use ChatGPT, they're using AI, they might be using it as a therapist as well. So I want to know your thoughts on the future, let's say, like specifically AI.
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Um, well, if I when I'm discussing this with a client, of course, we don't have any federal regulations right now. There are some state uh, uh, rules, perhaps, that are being formulated. I don't know that they're really on the books. But we are looking to our international parties for that, and we do have a lot of international clients at iKeepSafe. So um, the EU AI Act is one of them, for example, where they have developed some really good um, fundamentals on risk. It's really a risk-based system, and they rate their AI applications according to high risk or unacceptable risk, right? Meaning that no one should be using this in a particular setting. You just mentioned speaking with, or something along the lines. We have one that is for social, emotional well being of a child, where a child can talk to an AI bot uh, and as a pal or friend and get some basic feedback. Of course, there are guardrails in place, and that really is the key word, guardrails. And but in Europe, they do have risk um, uh, hierarchy where they're looking at each one of these to determine what situation would be unacceptable, such as maybe um, in an educational environment, maybe we shouldn't be using certain AI companions, right? Or perhaps maybe in the health arena, we need to have more appropriate guardrails in place. So they really are formulating and have formulated a risk assessment. And that is something that I tell our clients, that when we're looking at AI features, whether they're native to the product that we're working with or whether they're using OpenAI or ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude, that we're asking them to really look at the risk mitigation and use a framework that's available by several industry standards, NEST being one of them. And we do have some clients that are looking at risk mitigation and identifying those risks, and putting the proper guardrails in place, and then having some level of human intervention, right? In case there are, um, if there is a necessity to have a human override, right, a particular outcome. Um, so it is interesting, and it is expanding the landscape for us because it is being used in educational technology in a meaningful way, right? I don't necessarily mean in a dangerous way, but to help teachers create curriculum, to help them summarize something that maybe a student has written, and to assess their writing capabilities. Uh, we do have some that are using it so that they can use the AI feature to do research, that meaning student facing, and allowing students to interface with the AI application to do the research of a particular topic. So it really runs the whole gamut. Teachers are using them, students are using them, but again, we're evaluating in the educational context in terms of how they're being used and what guardrails have really been in place. And then we have, again, it goes back to the basic premise of COPPA, and that is to have the proper disclosures in place. If we are using AI, what we should be disclosing, how they, just as COPPA has stated, and even some of the other federal regulations on privacy and data collection. What data are we collecting? How long is it being stored? How is it being used? Are we being used to train the AI system or the LLM system? Um, what system are we using? Who is our, that's another requirement of COPPA, so it relates to AI. We don't need another regulation for it. It simply states that you will disclose in your privacy policy who are your third party operators. And so if we're using OpenAI, uh, Claude, or any of the other well-known names, we're disclosing that, and we're recommending to our clients that we have a statement as well that talks about, okay, what are the benefits, right, and what are the risks. So if you are dealing with someone that maybe has an application that summarizes, let's say it's a particular um, uh, psychological, social well-being summary, uh, is the summary really accurate, right? We're not, and a disclosure would state we're not a medical provider, or we're not a doctor offering medical advice. So those disclosures are being made and should be made, right? There should be knowledge that it's not going to be perfect, and it is an ever evolving tool that we're using in education and elsewhere.
It seems that there's a lot of pros and cons, with the biggest one being like, all of the the information that's being shared, what is being shared, how is it being shared, how is it being used. And like you said, that's where COPPA comes in to help those regulations and help be upfront with parents in particular. This is what's being shared. But it doesn't seem like there is a particular AI platform, maybe I don't know, but a particular AI platform that is COPPA certified. Or do you know a few that are?
I would say that if you read their policies, and that's a great question, those particular large big tech vendors, I would say that because I have read some of their policies, they really don't address it, right? They don't say that they're COPPA certified. What we see is that if you're using those other third parties, they are using APIs to restrict the use of the AI app, and can build certain guardrails in place to, let's say, if I'm a child and I've been told not to put in any PII, my first name, last name, my address as I'm talking to a chatbot or even an educational interface that talks to an AI system, uh, it's constantly telling them not to do that, right? And it repeats that over and over again because I've tested that. Uh, and I see where some are going to encrypt the data, so when the output is generated, even in their logs, it's not really generating the PII. So they've built a custom interface that would permit any PII that is submitted to be either encrypted or to be somehow decoded or de-identified, right? So that not even that third party, should they have access to it, be able to know that, okay, this is Susie Smith and Susie Smith lives at this address. Um, yeah, but I would, as I stated, I would read their policies, but you're not going to see something, I would say, under COPPA with those products. And some of them might just say it's not to be, a lot of them will say it's not to be used by children under the age of 18 or under the age of 16 or 13. They may say that. Um, and of course, for good reason. Um, but if some of the ones that are being built into the products that we're reviewing, either for educational technology or just for children and child directed devices, they're building interfaces and guardrails in place to protect the child's data, and again, how it's being used and how it's being shared, and what they can actually discuss. I've even tested for, as you know, we've had um, harm to children, suicidal tendencies, and other harms to children using AI. And so some of the ones that I've looked at and tested are not really, if you start talking to them about your emotional well being, or if you want to have a conversation that's something other than what they're there for, which in most cases would be education, like let's talk about the planet, Pluto, or let's talk about space or NASA. Would you like to be an astronaut one day? And then if you attempt to talk about other things off topic, then those guardrails are in place and they force them to go back into that lane, so to speak, so that they continue the conversation in that lane where they should be talking about educational uh, topics. Not sure
I
if
think
you, yeah,
I
if you,
think that's really important.
it is.
What are your thoughts? I know the biggest news, or maybe it's a few weeks old, Roblox. That I know has been going around a lot. I don't know if you've heard about it, how they're currently in a lawsuit, I'm pretty sure with LA County, about how. So Roblox is a gaming platform where. Do you know about Roblox?
I believe I've read the case, but I've read so many cases. Last week I was reading a lot of them. I probably read 50 cases. So yeah, I am familiar with them. I'd have to look on my chart to see where they are, but okay, go ahead.
Of course. And the most recent article I read was how LA is suing them because they are sharing information, especially for kids that are under 13. There's parents that are, in a way, like oblivious to it because they just assume, oh, it's a game, it's safe, it's for kids. And Roblox does market itself as a creative platform that is a safe space. But what they don't say is that it is an area where predators can be online. They can talk to kids. They can hide behind that screen and say, oh no, like I'm the same age as you. So, what are your thoughts on that whole situation?
It's a problem. I don't know why they are. I don't know. Again, I'd have to read their privacy policy. I do know, or I did know some of the history when it first came out. But I would just say that I would be very weary of a gaming platform for children, number one, uh, not only for harmful content, just because, as you stated, you can talk to strangers. Now, under the COPPA regulations, they may not have uh, properly collected consent and provided notice to the parent. They may not have done that. But I believe they were also potentially, I'd have to go look at the case. I really don't want to say I'll just say what could have been theoretically. Uh, I'd have to look it up, but maybe they were using data for other commercial purposes, right? That would be a big no-no under COPPA. Of course, there are, and I mentioned that in the overview of the progression, there were gaming providers that were saying, well, another issue had to do with the free service. Um, and so they were enticing and encouraging children to come online and to play the games. And then once they got them hooked on the game, they were offering other uh, mechanisms, we'll call them in app purchases, where, hey, if you give us this information and that information, then you can play the game, but you'll have additional little widgets or trinkets or, things that enhance the experience. Um, and so my overall concern would be, well, even though it's a free service, um, the opportunity there, you have to think about their business revenue model and understand how they're really making money. Um, and if it's a free service, then they must be doing something else with the data, right? And then in terms of collecting, there's this data minimization concept that you'll hear within the realm of privacy and all over different regulations around the globe. And of course, is the data absolute under COPPA? Is the data, we always look to see, is the data absolutely necessary that you're collecting to perform this function? Like, why would you need uh, an address, right? A physical address of a child, or uh, more sensitive information. One of we haven't talked yet about the expansion of COPPA, but COPPA has just recently been expanded um, to include they've uh, d- expanded the definition of PII to include biometric data, right? And this just happened recently. So again, as the technology is evolving, and you see this when you go into an airport or you're going into even a store like Target, where your biometric data might be collected, a fingerprint, right, or a facial recognition technology. Uh, so under COPPA, prior to last year, biometric data had not been included, but it is included now. Uh, because we really don't know how they're using that information. And another thing I would just stress is once that data, and we do see this, once that data is collected and it is disclosed, whether it's disclosed to just one third party, doesn't necessarily mean it's only that's the stopping place, or that's the last place for it to go, right? If you were to track your data, more than likely it would have uh, traveled to many different, depending on the opt in and opt out consent processes in different state regulations, especially under California. The data, once it goes to a data broker, it's really gone. It's very difficult to retain that data and have control over the data and ownership of that data and ask for it to be returned. Now, you can ask for it to be returned under the COPPA regulations with uh, any online operator. However, if it's been sent to some other provider, uh, they will make an attempt, and they should have consistent policies with the primary uh, data collector of the website that you're interfacing with. But there's always not that guarantee, right? That the third parties that the operator is working with that can return the data. And then that's just another assurance that we under COPPA are looking for, is to provide those assurances of their third parties that they can comply with the rules and the regulations as it relates to FERPA or COPPA. Because it is that concept of the data broker, and where can we really retrieve the data once it's gone, and you may not have that traceability of where the data could be tracked down to its final destination, right? That really is the concern.
And then for parents, when they do click check, when they do sign the acknowledgement, the consent forms, it's a really long form. And I do know there are parents out there that might not want to read every single little detail because there's so much information. So, what would you recommend that parents kind of look out for specifically so that they don't have to read everything word for word, or is there a red flag to look out for as well?
I would be really careful, as I mentioned earlier, about free services, right? And again, it goes back to the business model and how they're generating revenue. Um, if they don't want to read, I mean, I would encourage them to read a privacy policy, especially even though you may not want to read all the detail. Look for the COPPA. I call it a COPPA supplement. Look for the COPPA section, or FERPA, but definitely COPPA. Look for the COPPA section. If there's no reference to COPPA and they're collecting data from children and they're child directed, or their general audience and they're collecting data from children, look for information in their policy. Just do a scan and see if there's anything in there about COPPA. If there's not, then you have to ask a question in terms of what, uh, why is this child, is this an appropriate tool for my child to use if there's no reference to COPPA? Could they, and you have to ask yourself, what are the, without reading all the fine line, how are they able to interact with others on the service, right? Can they talk to strangers? Is there a way to block strangers, right? Some of the features that you have in your own TickTalk device. Um, Meaning, is there an approval mechanism uh, so that parents know who our children are are dealing with online, or if it's a device such as a watch, or even a child's toy, um, and what kind of notifications, right? If something does go wrong, what type of notifications will we receive? If there is maybe a terms of service violation, or terms of use violation. And another thing is, if you don't see that information there, then I would look in the contact section, which is usually at the very bottom of the policy, and see, okay, it'll either be legal, an address for the legal department, and they're usually very responsive, or someone in customer support that you can send and say, hey, I really like your product, would like for my child to use your product, but I don't really see anything in here about it either being child directed or COPPA compliance or any parental controls for children. Is this product really not meant for children? That's what I think they should ask in the very beginning. Is that
Hopefully, the
help? Is that
parents.
helpful?
Yes, it is. And I hope that helps parents have a little relief when they're like, okay, I don't have to read the whole thing, but here's what I should look out for, like this, and this. And something I did also notice with parents is that they complain about our watches that we don't do geofencing. And I know you mentioned it earlier, so is there a particular factor of geofencing that like tracks or holds on to that information and that parents should be aware about to stay away from geofencing or something else?
I think it should be, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from the TikTok device, you can control who actually has access to that.
Yes.
So there is a mechanism, and it's an admin role where you can control, okay, I only want grandma and mommy and daddy to know where I'm located, right? And the history, I believe the history is available. But I want no other contacts, right? No other contacts to have that level of knowledge. Um, that's, I think, really important, right? Because we don't want everyone to be able, who is on the contact list with a watch, to be able to track the child. And it shouldn't be readily available. And then in terms of the history logs, I believe they might be able to delete them on their own. Um, I'd have to look at that, but that might be one of the features that you have where where you can go. So a lot of apps that we review, and also on these wearables, what we call, yours would be under the category of wearables. So under wearables, occasionally you will see you could do a factory default setting, right? And just wipe everything out. I'm pretty sure that would do it. But there might just be a different mode there where you could wipe that out completely. Kind of like do a data cleansing, right? Where, okay, it's been a month, my child's been using this, we don't really want to see the history logs. Let's do a reset, right? Let's hit the reset button. So a lot of services have these reset buttons, which would really give you more comfort level, right? Because the data is gone, it's no longer available. Those are other things that make the parent, again, in more control of the child's use of the hardware, or the wearables in this case.
It also would give them a lot of peace of mind knowing, oh, this is something that I can delete, or this is something that I know I have control over, so I don't have to worry about it.
Right. And you state in your policy, because I did read it before the call, you state that others uh, will not really have access to it. And if it is, it's encrypted. So it's in an encrypted format. But you do state that you're not, because you are required to disclose that in terms of what data you're sharing with others, right? You're required to disclose who could potentially have access to the data and for what purpose. And you state in your policy that no one else will have access to the data, whether it's through, and I believe it is through end-to-end encryption. And you state that in your policy. Uh, the only concern, and of course, this is what we review as part of our certification process, we look for vulnerabilities, right? So not only are you, when you talk about COPPA, again, I may have mentioned it earlier on the call, COPPA doesn't tell us what is safe and secure in terms of data security, but they say there will be reasonable uh, data security measures, right, based on current technology. But we evaluate things like the encryption, level of service that you're offering? It's really graded, right? Does it pass the test? Is it uh, the transport layer security they refer to? Is it is it current? Is it up to date? Are the cyber suites up to date? And if they're not, let's update them, right? To make sure that your transport layer security is current. The other thing is the authentication method, right? We're constantly looking at in our program, and they mentioned this in several of the FTC cases, where, as I mentioned earlier, there were data breaches. Well, why were there data breaches? Did it have to do with the encryption? Did it have to do with the authentication method? How does a child onboard the service, right? How is the child uh, accessing the service? And that's something that we look at. And what are the vulnerabilities of the service when a user is authenticated? Um, because we don't want hackers and other um, sources to have access to that data, right? So and you state in your policy that you've implemented these things.
And are there any other kids' technologies that you know of that are also COPPA compliant as well, besides the TikTok watch?
Are there other, in your industry, in wearables?
Let's say like wearables or even like an iPad, maybe an app or two that is like COPPA compliant as well.
Yeah, of course. So when you go to, of course, your users, your user base, when they're using the watch, that's one of the benefits is that it's not going to allow them to download any apps, right? On an via an internet browser or either going to one of the stores and access social media or games. However, if they were to use a device that could do that, as I mentioned earlier, uh, the privacy policy before downloading that app will state whether or not they're COPPA compliant. And some of the ratings, you start with the rating, of course. So if you're using an iOS phone or an Android phone, you're going to download an app. You're in the store. Okay, what's the rating? Right, that's what the parent should be checking. And then if it says sharing, oh, that's a big flag. You talked about red flag sharing. Who are we sharing with? That's usually right there in the developer's notes. And then if you do click it, finally get to the privacy disclosure, and you see that it's directed to children, but yet there's no COPPA compliance mentioned and how we're COPPA compliant, right? I could list all the things of how TikTok is COPPA compliant, or what would be a violation if we weren't COPPA compliant. And so if it's not there, there's a reason it's not there. It's either not meant for children or they're not compliant and they might potentially be in violation, right? We just don't know.
And is there something that excites you most about the future of privacy first kids technology?
Oh, okay. I am excited as we talked about AI. I am an AI, what we call AI governance. Um, I do think that what I'm seeing, because I started evaluating AI for educational purposes probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think it really started to take off kind of right after the COVID timeframe. And I'm real interested to see, because I've mentioned a few other areas of how it's being used for, like, for example, with the virtual headsets or the augmented headsets and using it for special needs children. I just think that's phenomenal, right? To be able to put a child in a setting where they're being walked through an airport or at a store and they're required to order something to eat and to train them that way. But then just to make sure that, okay, is the data that we're collecting, uh, is it is it going to be safe and secure for that child? And then of course based on the cases that we're seeing and some of the other uh, online internet regulations that are might be coming up, like COSA, are they going to address anything as it relates to AI and inappropriateness, such as what we're hearing about the social AI companions uh, and the risk there, the harms that could potentially be there if the guardrails aren't in place? Then where do we go from there, right? Are we going to be monitoring these things? Will we have as the EU AI Act has a rating scale, maybe? Theirs is risk based. Maybe we'll have a rating scale one day, just as for AI, uh, based on risk or based on age category or something along those lines. Um, and then, or as I mentioned, appropriateness, and then what would that rating system look like?
And you did mention how the UAE.
The EU AI Act. So
Oh yes, how like the U.S. doesn't have any federal rules or
oops,
regulations when it
gosh.
comes to AI. Was that
Uh huh.
correct? But there are maybe other countries that do have like a regulation.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
there are others. Oh my goodness. So we at iKeepSafe, we really do have a lot of international presence and clients. South Korea, uh, I believe they might have an AI act on the books. And I have a South Korean client that has an app for children. I believe, don't, well, there are other countries that are doing this, the EU AI Act, of course, and then I do know South Korea. There's some other ones. It might be Australia. They're really just all over the map. There are others that are following either the EU AI Act or going to have their own. But some one of the conferences I was at recently in DC, they were one of the senators was present and talking about tech. It was a conversation about virtual reality. We were talking about just virtual reality topics and how it's being used, as I was mentioning, in warfare and military training and medical training as well. But AI was mentioned, and several of the respondents in the room stated they felt that it could be that we don't really need a separate one, that it could really be included and embedded in the current existing regulations. So, as I mentioned earlier, um, COPPA may not talk about AI right now, but if you apply the same rule to the AI technology and what's actually going on, what data it's collecting and storing and how it's being used, you could follow the rule to determine appropriateness and compliance. And there actually was, I won't mention the name, but there was a case that was using AI and training it, or the large language model, and believe it or not, they were fined for a COPPA violation. So there's probably more there's more litigation in other countries, but we've had some litigation based on AI here. Of course, most of it's related to intellectual property rights, but I'm talking about true privacy uh, issue here and using AI.
How
Does
long do
that
you think it? Oh, yes, it is very much so.
help?
But
Okay.
how long do you think it would take for there to be some sort of federal policy for like against AI or honestly like technology as well?
I believe right now the current administration has put a moratorium on that. Yeah, so I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I would say in the next couple of years we're not going to see it. But that's not to say that there won't be some violations either under Section 5 of the FTC for unfair business practices, right? Or it could be COPPA. I've already mentioned there is one where a company was fined because of using the data to train their model, and it was children's data, right? Uh, so we will see some litigation, intellectual property litigation, other types of litigation, um, and we could see children, but they're going to rely on the existing regulations right now.
Well, I hope there is some sort of regulation that will be set in stone that can help protect like kids and parents, or something about information being more upfront as well, so that parents don't necessarily have to scroll and scroll and scroll through all the policies,
Yeah,
or because I know some
I
parents also
definitely
don't
would.
have the time.
sh- Sure, and I would make sure that as they're scanning the document, just to look for the COPPA section uh, in terms of privacy. There should be something there. You'll see in a lot of our clients, we have a FERPA and COPPA section, disclosures and notice. And um, if they're not child directed, you're not going to see it. Or if they're general audience and they have a child site or a child section, you might see something there if they have actual knowledge that they're collecting data from children. But then they should be applying the COPPA rule, right, to their service. So I think that's really the easiest way, because when I first look at the clients that are coming in, I look to see, are we child directed? Is it age appropriate? And and what are the COPPA protections that we're providing? Where are they? Let's go find them in the in the write up in the policy notice. And if they're not there, then I would be more skeptical.
And ending on this note, what advice would you give parents who are just starting to introduce technology to their kids?
The most important point, I think, is maintaining a really good balance, right? That, and even your device, TikTok, has a what's it called, a focus mode, right? Where, okay, we're going to set some boundaries, just like you would any other activity for a child. Why would their online habits not have some form of boundaries? And use whatever's available, whether it's a focus mode or setting the screen time limited. And I would have a really good conversation with them about privacy and what that really means, because I think it does vary in terms of their age range and their age group, and with what they know and with what they don't know. It's what they don't know that concerns us, and have a conversation and determine, what do you really think about you as a child submitting some personal information and information of others? How do you feel about providing some protections to them as well, right? And engaging in healthy uh, online connections with children. I think that's important.
Well, that was really great advice that I hope a lot of parents realize, because I feel like they overlook talking about boundaries, specifically with like privacy and information sharing, especially when it comes to a game or a
Yeah,
free game where everything isn't upfront.
right,
Well, thank you so much,
right.
Anna, for joining. Oh,
And they
sorry.
may not,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, oh, I was just going to say, they may not realize until a decade later,
Yeah, I agree.
right? Or 5 years later, right? What type of online profile or online reputation they've built. So that's why I said, let's engage them. Let's have a conversation about what that really means. How do we want to, what's our persona, right? What's our online persona?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for joining us on TikTok University today. And I hope a lot of parents now know what COPPA is and what to be more aware about when it comes to giving their kids technology and access to games as well.
Oh, my pleasure. Nice to meet
You
you.
too.